history, kind of how we got started, and then we break down that label, talk about what's a bourbon, what's a whiskey, how do those differ, that kind of thing. Then we'll go through our whole process of how we make whiskey, and then we'll head over to the production area, let you see what all that looks like in 3D, and then we will wrap up with a guided tasting of a couple of different whiskeys. Nice. So my name is Ethan. I will be your tour guide today. Just feel free if you've got questions. If I need to talk louder or you want to go more detail on something, just let me know. And then, like we talked about earlier, pictures, videos, totally cool. So feel free to do that as well. Yes. And if that sounds good with y'all, we'll just go ahead and get started.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So we are here at Laws Whiskey House. So I will begin by telling you a little bit about Al Laws. He is our CEO and founder. He does put the laws in Laws Whiskey House. Al grew up in Alberta, Canada. Huge whiskey lover his entire life. Very avid whiskey collector as well. So Al's got about 650, 700 bottles in his collection at home. He likes to call it his whiskey library. And this is a man who does not believe in hoarding whiskey, so these are all open, ready to be shared with his family and friends. Al definitely thinks if you've got something cool, something unique, share it with the people that are important to you. Really, what's the whole point there? Yep. But Al's journey did not begin in the whiskey business. He actually studied economics, got involved in the oil and gas industry, ended up working as an oil and gas analyst for Merrill Lynch. So he moved to New York, lived in Brooklyn, worked on Wall Street, did that for a number of years. He was very good at it, was very successful. But he knew deep inside that oil and gas was not his true passion in life. This was not something he wanted to do forever. So he was actually looking into opening a distillery in New York. And we got very lucky. 2007, Merrill Lynch moved down with his family out to Denver, Colorado. What was supposed to be a 2-year contract, but like a lot of us that ended up in Colorado from elsewhere, they fell in love right away, decided to stay, canceled any plans they had of returning to New York, and he opened his distillery here instead. So he was doing a lot of research at this point, reading up on bourbon, whiskey, distilling, things of that nature, and plenty of good information out there, books, magazines, documentaries. Obviously, the internet is a huge resource. But I think if you truly have your heart set on making bourbon, the best thing you could do is just take a trip down to Kentucky. So 2009, that's when Al and his wife Mary Ann did. They went down the Bourbon Trail, visited distilleries down there, met with lots of different people. They were actually incredibly fortunate. They were introduced to a man named Bill Friel. Are you all familiar with Mr. Friel at all? I'm sure you've had 1792 or seen that on shelves perhaps. Yeah. So that was Bill's baby. He was the master distiller at Barton's for about 40 years. So Bill's a pretty big name in the bourbon world. He's actually in the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. I think he's going to be around 90 this year, so he's been doing this for a little while. Al got introduced to Bill. We were supposed to have just a little 45-minute meet and greet. I actually ended up chatting for several hours, and Al succeeded in talking Bill out of his retirement, got him to come up here and help us establish Laws Whiskey House. So tremendously beneficial to us to have like a living legend on board in the beginning. And Bill helped us with a number of different things. He helped us come up with the mash bill for our 4-grain bourbon. So that is going to be 60% corn, 20% wheat, 10% rye, 10% malted barley. So it's difficult to make a 4-grain bourbon, and we will get into why that is here in a little bit. But another thing that Bill helped us with is our floor design, slightly unique. Al was our only employee in the beginning, so he wanted everything to be nice and close, kind of within arm's reach for one person. So in order to save some space, they suspended some of the equipment on a series of raised platforms that would run that piping underneath versus like across the production area, keep it a little bit more compact. And we have expanded, so we have a 2,000-gallon stripping still. We doubled the size of the picker from 500 to 1,000 gallons. We have far more than 12 fermentation tanks at the moment. So production area has expanded, but it is still a very efficient setup, and we can operate with just one distiller at a time if we need to. So another thing that Bill really helped out with, and we will take a good look at it once we head over to the production area, but very important piece of equipment connected to our 500-gallon spirit still. This is commonly referred to as a sight glass. So this is where you can actually see that clear distillate, the White Dog, new make, green whiskey, whatever you want to call that, as it comes off of the still. And not only can our distillers see that spirit, but they can take any measurements they might need, so like temperature, crude. They can even smell, touch, feel the whiskey as it comes off of the still. And this is crucial because during the second distillation, we're going to separate portions of the distillate. It does not all end up in barrels. And this separation process is commonly referred to as making cuts. You'll often hear those individual pieces called like the heads, hearts, and tails. And we're going to get into this in a lot more detail later on. But what's important to know right now, Bill and Al, very different approaches to things when it came time to make those first cuts. So you've got Al, an analyst by trade, a numbers guy. He's got his notebook full of formulas and metrics. He wanted to do everything 100% volumetrically based on those measurements he was getting off the still. And then you bring in old school Kentucky distiller Bill Friel. So first thing Bill did was take Al's notebook away from him and actually teach him how to smell, taste, feel the whiskey, bring his senses into these calculations. And that's a tradition we continue today. So yes, our distillers are taking measurements off the sight glass, but they're also smelling, touching, feeling the whiskey, bringing their own senses into it as well. So July 4th, 2011, Bill and Al laid down our very first barrel. Bill came up here, really showed Al the basics of distilling. He's back in Kentucky. He's happily retired once again. And it was up to Al to lay down our first 60 or so barrels. So he was working full-time at Merrill Lynch. He had not retired from his day job, so as you might imagine, he was quite busy during these days. Going to work, operating the still, squeezing in sleep here and there whenever he could. But for 3 years, all we did was make and age whiskey. We did not open our doors to the public until October of 2014. So fairly rare for a young distillery to get started and not sell anything for 3 years. Lots of times your emerging whiskey distilleries, they'll sell that white dog, that unaged distillate, or they'll also begin by making gin, vodka, things that don't require aging. Or a lot of them will engage in a relatively common practice referred to as sourcing, where they'll buy whiskey from another distillery and they'll put their own label on it. But if y'all ever have an opportunity to meet Al, you'll find out almost immediately. He's very, very passionate about his whiskey and the way he wants it made. So for those first couple of years, that's all we were doing. Any questions about that kind of brief early history?
Yep.
All right, cool. Next thing we can talk about is some rules and regulations. Basically, what do the words on this bottle mean? There's a lot of them. They're all important. Whiskey is a good place to start. Not necessarily the best of definitions. So the TTB defines whiskey as a spirit derived from grains with whiskey-like characteristics. So it does not tell us much other than we are using grains as a base. When I think about whiskey, I think a tree analogy is really useful. So whiskey is your trunk, right? Now we're going to split into all these different branches, and that's where you're going to get Scotch, Irish, Bourbon, Rye, Corn, Canadian, Japanese, just to name a few. So tons and tons of different ways you can make a whiskey. And they're all going to have their own rules and requirements. So if anybody's a Scotch fan, you probably know there's lots of rules you have to follow to make Scotch in terms of regulation. Scotch is way up here. Opposite end of that spectrum is where we will find Canadian whiskey. Not a lot of rules up there. Basically, if you make it in Canada, either for 3 years, you've got Canadian whiskey. So you can have flavoring, you can have coloring, not too many restrictions up north. We're going to focus on bourbon today, though. And we do have a couple of main rules for how bourbon needs to be made. Great way to remember them is we usually call them our ABCs. So A, America.
Are you okay if a group joins in?
Yeah.
They were planning to be before 30 and they just have to off.
That's fine. Y'all want to pause for a second? Let's let
Yeah.
join us.
Of course.
Appreciate that.
Alright, they'll be up front.
Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Just last minute walk-ins. Ruining your private tour. No.
It's okay.
We'll just give them dirty looks.
Yeah, there you go. You got the good spot already, too.
Yeah, exactly.
So this was in 2009 when he.
I think he bought this building in 2010.
Wow.
And I think we started in 2011, actually, distilling.
And in 2014.
It's when we opened the tasting room. And then this year, we opened the brand new tasting room. So the
Yeah.
10-year anniversary, that's kind of cool.
Are these
And
actually?
yeah, our distilling anniversary was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago now.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Are these actually aging here as well? These barrels?
These are right here.
Okay.
We like to have some around just to like show tours.
Mhm.
And Al actually built these racks himself, so it's kind of cool, like a little nostalgia.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And then these barrels are moved over to our main aging warehouse, which is like a little under a mile
I see.
here. And that's where the office is located. That's where our packaging team is at.
Okay. Bottling's there.
Yeah, it's weird. It's super close, but you have to go like under the train tracks and then around, so it's kind of a little ways to get there.
Okay.
You can see it actually. So if you're looking out from our office, you can see the new tasting room and kind
Yeah.
of like vice versa. Just our more roundabout way.
Yeah, because he kind of built a pseudo rip system there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, so this was originally the South Rack House, and
Okay.
then the
Okay.
opposite end, where like our LSS machine and our camera room is at now, was like the North Rack House.
Okay.
So everything was at one point out of this building.
Okay.
We just, grown, which is good.
Nice. Good problem to have.
Yeah, exactly.
Where do you guys? I'm assuming you source some cooperage or barrels.
Yeah, independent seed company. Hello, hello. Welcome.
Over here. I'm gonna follow you. Lily, the boys over on the other side.
Scoot, scoot. Y'all didn't miss anything. We were just going over our early history. So basically, we were founded by a man named Al Laws. He grew up in Alberta, Canada. He was an economist by trade, worked for Merrill Lynch as an oil and gas analyst on Wall Street. Did that for a number of years, didn't want to do it forever. Was gonna open a distillery in New York, was moved down here on a 2-year contract. They just decided to stay. So in 2009, he went down to Kentucky, met with Bill Friel, who was the retired 40-year master distiller at Barton's. He talked Bill into coming up here and helping us establish Laws Whiskey House. So that's basically all of this. So just a little brief early history. And we were just talking about what makes a whiskey and what makes a bourbon. So the TTB just defines whiskey as a spirit derived from grains with whiskey-like characteristics, so that really tells us nothing at all, other than we do use grains as the base. And we just kind of talk about some differences, because you have lots of types of whiskey, so Scotch, Irish, bourbon, rye, corn, Japanese, Canadian. And they're all going to have their own regulations. So in terms of the strictest regulations, Scotch way up at the top. Opposite end of that spectrum, Canadian whiskey. There's pretty much no rules as long as you make it in Canada and age it for 3 years, you can call it Canadian whiskey. So you can have flavoring, you can have coloring. Bourbon's our focus today. We've got 3 main rules for making bourbon. Thank you, Ryan. And really the best way to remember them is we just call them our ABCs. So America, bourbon has to be made in the United States. Does not have to come from Kentucky. That's a fairly common misconception. Obviously, Kentucky is the birthplace of bourbon. You've got Bourbon Trail, Bourbon County, all the history runs through Kentucky. I would say probably 90–95% of bourbon made in this country today is still produced in Kentucky, but they never made any kind of regional designation law. So great example, Champagne, right? You can make sparkling wine all over the world. But if you do not do it in that particular region in France, you cannot refer to it as Champagne. So Kentucky never made any kind of regional designation law like that. It actually wasn't until 1964 that Lyndon B. Johnson in our 88th U.S. Congress declared bourbon to be America's national spirit. And since then, it's been required to be made in the United States. So kind of cool. I honestly didn't know we had a national spirit before I started working here. Did anybody else know that? All right, little fun fact for you all. That wraps up our A's. Moving on to B, barrels. So every time we make bourbon, we have to use brand new charred oak barrels. So we are required to use new barrels every time. We can end up with lots of leftover barrels. What do we do with them? Fairly traditional, just those get sent overseas. So Scotch distilleries will start.
Who requires that?
The TTB, so the federal alcohol regulator, basically.
Okay.
So yeah, these are like codified laws. Same thing in Scotland, they have like the Scotch Whiskey Act. So yeah, these are very, very real things. Yeah, it's mostly the TTB. It's an Alcohol, Tobacco, Trade, and Tax Bureau, I think is what it stands for. I think it was part of the ATF, and then once Homeland Security came around, they did like a little reshuffle, and the TTB got all like the tax stuff, and then the ATF actually got all like the enforcement stuff. So, but yeah, it is regulated. So you usually see those barrels get sent to like Scotland or down to Jalisco in Mexico for like tequila aging. We're pretty fortunate being in Denver. We have a very robust craft brewing scene, so our barrels don't get sent quite so far. We just sell the vast majority of the breweries around town. So we've done lots of really cool projects with like True, Bear, Great Divide, AC Golden, Stem Cider, ate some ciders in some of our barrels even. So lots of fun projects with our friends around town. We will not sell all of our barrels. Some of them we will trade with our barrel broker. We do what we call our experiential series, where we'll take a bourbon, a wheat, a rye, age it a couple of years, and use brand new charred American oak barrels, and then we'll move it to a secondary vessel for some additional aging. So right now I've got a bourbon finish in cognac barrels, I've got one finish in Madeira barrels, I've got one finish in apple brandy barrels, and then I have a wheat whiskey finish in Burns liqueur barrels. So all of those are open, all of them are available for tasting. If anybody's interested, just remind me after your tour once we get back downstairs, and we can definitely taste through those because they are super cool. And then lastly, C, corn. Every time we make bourbon, we have to use a minimum of 51% corn. We are going to do 60, 20, 10, and 10 of those respective grains. The reason why you don't see a lot of 4-grain bourbons and it's difficult to do well is rye is kind of a problem. So rye is a very strong flavored grain. We call it a bully grain for this reason. Usually when you put all 4 of these together, the rye overwhelms the wheat. So I always tell people, imagine making a sandwich with like wheat bread on one side, rye bread on the other, putting that together, taking a bite out of it. You're probably not going to taste the wheat. So most people make a 3-grain bourbon. By far the most common of those are your high rye variant. So that's like Hazel Hayden, Knob Creek, your bolder, spicier bourbons. Far less common, but my personal favorite are going to be those wheated bourbons. Wheat is your flavor grade. So those are a bit softer, a little bit sweeter. So if anybody's a fan of like Valor or Maker's Mark,
Happy.
those are some good examples of wheated bourbons. But y'all will see when we get to the end here and we try our 4-grain bourbon, we will be able to taste all 4 of those ingredients. So, quick recap on those ABCs. Basically, if you are making a whiskey in the United States from mostly corn and aging in brand new charred oak barrels, you can refer to it as bourbon. So all bourbon is whiskey, not all whiskey is bourbon. Is another good way of thinking about it. Yes, sir.
Where are you getting your oak from?
Independent State Company. They're cooperage in Lebanon, Missouri, to be specific. So it's Ozark, American White Oak. And the Ozark region is known for having exceptionally high quality of American White Oak. Oddly enough, they have a cooperage in Lebanon, Kentucky too. We just happen to use the Missouri one. ISC is a pretty big operation. They've got cooperages all over the world. They've been building barrels since at least the early 1900s.
So they arrive here looking like the pallet right behind.
Yeah. So they come wrapped like that. ISC only does full orders. So if you want to get barrels from them, you have to buy a truckload, which is about 300 barrels. So as you can see, they just kind of hang out wherever we can put them until we're ready for them.
Do you char them or do they come?
They char them for us, yeah. So before they put the heads on, which are also referred to as chimes, so this part right here, they'll basically send it down an assembly line and then blast the inside of it with a really quick, intense heat. And then once we go through the production area, we actually have some like char samples, and I'll show you what the inside of the barrels look
Do
like.
you know what the heat source is for the charring? Is it natural gas? Is it?
I would assume gas.
Yeah.
I would assume gas. That would make the most sense to me. I know that they do use steam when they're bending the staves. It's the traditional in the U.S. Europe still does like a more actual flame on like a brazier. But U.S. is more common to steam the staves to bend them.
Alright. I'll stop barraging you now.
No, you're good. You're good. I like questions. That's how I remember things. So as the people keep asking me about it, so appreciate it. So since we are making a bourbon, the only thing we can add to it is water for proofing, meaning 5 ingredients go into the contents of this bottle. You've got your grains, your water, your yeast, the barrel, and the time it takes it all to mature. And what that really tells us is 100% of that color and about 50 to 70% of the flavor actually comes from the barrel maturation process. So since so much of the flavor comes from the time spent in the barrel, knowing how long it's been in there is crucial. We make a straight whiskey. All straight whiskeys are aged a minimum of 2 years. If we've aged them less than 4, we are required to tell you exactly how long. So if y'all flip our bottles over, it'll say aged at least 3 years on the back. And then ours will also say distilled, aged, and bottled by Laws Whiskey House. So if you're at your local store, you're looking at bottles, you're wondering, are they sourcing their whiskey? Are they making it themselves? The only way you can tell for sure if they make their own whiskey is if it says distilled by on it. So if it says aged and bottled by, produced by, manufactured and bottled by, basically any combination of those words that doesn't have distilled by in them, you can't really tell. And there's nothing wrong with sourcing whiskey. Kind of as I mentioned earlier, lots of younger distilleries start by sourcing whiskey when they wait for their own stock to mature. Other distilleries only source whiskey and they focus on like the blending aspect of the craft. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with sourcing whiskey. It's just not what we do around here. Any questions at all about those rules and regulations? We'll get into some fun stuff, which is how we make whiskey. So it's all going to start with our Colorado family farms. These are long-time family farms. So we're going to start at Denver. We're going to go all the way to Burlington, Colorado, right on the Kansas border. That's where the Whiskey Sisters are located. And then we're going to come up into the San Luis Valley. That is where the Cody family farm, the Colorado Malting Company, is based out of. So these are long-time family farms. The Whiskey Sisters have had their property since 1907. They are 2 sisters. The farm's actually been run by the women in their family since the late 1940s. So Felicia and Stephanie have taken over the operation. They grow all of our corn for us. And they've also set up this really cool brokerage, the Whiskey Sister Supply, where they try to pair family farms in Colorado with distilleries in the state and get more people using local Colorado grains, which I think is really nice. And then up in the San Luis Valley, Cody family, they've been farming for about 4 or 5 generations, so going back to at least the 1930s. They actually grew barley for Coors for about 50 years. They also ran a dairy business. They have since closed their dairy business. They converted their dairy barn into a malting facility, and now they grow a wheat, or rye, and a barley for us, and they malt all those grains for us as well. So if anybody's unfamiliar with malting, it is an essential and very interesting step in this process. So we have yeast. Yeast make alcohol for us. They're quite picky little creatures. They only like to eat sugar. These grains are made of starches. We have to find a way to convert that starch into sugar. That is where malting comes in. Basically, we're going to trick the grains into germinating without grains in them. So barley gives you the best yields. You'll generally see barley malted for that reason. And what they'll do is they'll spread their barley out on their malt barn floor. They're going to steep it in oxygenated water for several days. The grains will start to grow. They'll start to develop. You'll see the little rootlets sprout from them even. And when we see those rootlets, we know that our barley has released a couple of key enzymes. Those enzymes are going to convert a portion of that starch into a couple of sugars for us. So maltose and maltotriose, if you want to be specific. And then later, we're going to take those grains, add them into our 1,000-gallon cooker. We're going to add some water. Most importantly, we're going to add heat in the form of steam. That heat will act as a catalyst for those enzymes, convert the remainder of those starches into sugar for us. So although we're only using 10% of that malted barley, without the enzymes from that malting process, we really couldn't use the other grains. So small percentage, but the barley is doing a lot of that initial legwork here. So now we've got our grains. They're going to go in our grain garden. Those are those bins on the northeast side of the building. I'm sure you all saw them. You can see them from the street. They're pretty big. The 2 largest ones will hold 80,000 pounds of grains. That's about 2 full semi-truckloads full of grain. We've got another 3 that hold 20,000 pounds of grain, and then 1 that hold just 8,000 pounds of grain. So once we've got our grain, we'll send everything through our hammer mill. It just looks like a big metal box. But when you open it up, there's a large wheel on the inside, and it's got lots of long teeth on it. What happens is the wheel spins quite rapidly, and those teeth are going to crush these whole grains up into this nice fine powder that we call grist. So it looks like flour or cornmeal. It's like a relatively fine consistency. What that does is just expose those starches. It's going to aid in the enzymatic process. Is there a question? Oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
Oh, no.
Anyway, now we've got our grist. We can start loading our 1,000-gallon cooker. Not all at the same time. I mean, if you look at these grains, they're different. They actually cook better under different temperatures. So we're going to split it up into what we call a step cook. And what that looks like is corn and rye going first at the highest temperatures. We're going to cook those grains together, and then we're going to let it cool down, let things mellow, and then once the temperature is dropped enough, we can pitch in our more delicate grains, the wheat and the barley. So this takes roughly 4 to 5 hours. Once that's done, our hot mash is now going to leave our cooker and enter our heat exchanger. Coming in the other way is cold water. What they're going to do is actually exchange that heat, so it cools our mash down, which is good for our yeast. They're also quite picky about temperature. So our yeast likes to be about 85, 90 degrees. If it gets too warm, it'll stress them out. They'll produce off flavors. If it gets too cold, they will go dormant, and then they don't do anything for us at all. So we're going to get that mash in the appropriate temperature gradient for our yeast, while at the same time heating our water up for the next cook. So heat exchange is very efficient, and it'll save us some time. And then when that mash is at the right temperature, we can then pitch our yeast in. Yeast are going to feed on all those sugars for 4 days. In that time, they will make heat, CO2, and most importantly for us, alcohol, right? So after 4 days, our yeast start running out of food. They start to die off. They're going to settle down in the bottom of this tank. We use an ale yeast, so they top them until they expire. They're just going to put it down at the bottom. And then we have created a beer. So we've been brewing up until we get to this first still. We actually call that byproduct a distiller's beer, a distiller's ale. It is 7 to 9% alcohol. You can drink it if you want. You're probably not going to enjoy it unless you really like sour beers because it is quite tart at this point. But this is the last time it's truly going to be safe to consume until we do our second of 2 distillations. So any questions so far? So now we've got our distiller's beer, our distiller's ale. We'll do our first of 2 distillations. We call this a stripping run. The idea being we are stripping the alcohol away from the water and the grains. Distillation is just our science of separating liquids depending on their boiling points. So when we steam heat this, alcohol is more volatile than water. It's got a lower boiling point. So our alcohol vapor separates, it passes through those plates in our column. It's going to go down that lint arm into the condenser. Inside that condenser column, we have a bunch of coils with cold water running through them. What that's going to do is cool that alcohol vapor, convert it back into a liquid, and then we'll collect that off to the side in our low wine tanks. So 7 to 9% going in, 60 proof or 30% alcohol going out. And we will refine those low wines further, but before we get there, We've actually got a bunch of water and grain left over in our stripping still. So the very first thing we'll do is take about 100 gallons of it and add it to our next cook. So that is going to lower the pH of that mash. It's going to sour it, acidify it, however you want to describe that. This is that sour mash process. So I always like to point that out to people. I think sometimes they hear that term sour mash, they think it's like a product in of itself, but it's actually this process of adding that back set to our next cook. And this is beneficial for a number of reasons. One, yeast like an acidic environment, so it's going to help our yeast thrive. Acidic environments are going to be hostile to other microorganisms, so by keeping them out, we are eliminating opportunities for off flavors, we are establishing consistency between our batches. And then lastly, mixing with all this water and grain, dead yeast cells from the previous fermentation. So our new yeast are going to feed on all that energy from the dead and dying yeast, use that to jumpstart the next round of fermentation. So if anybody's taken like a starter piece and made sourdough bread before, it's fairly similar concepts here. The rest of that water and grain is going to go through our LSS machine, our liquid solid separator. It does exactly what it sounds like, just separates the grains from the water. Grains are actually going to go in that big white dumpster looking thing on wheels out front. That's for our farmers. They can come collect that grain free of charge, take it home and feed their animals. So reduces our waste, keeps the farmers nice and happy, pretty good deal for everybody. And then we've got that water left over, so we are going to get back to that. But before we get there, we still have to refine these low lines further. And this is where we'll get into those heads, hearts, and tails that I mentioned at the very beginning. So, steam heating, once again, but this time at those lower temperatures, we're going to get all those toxic volatile compounds. These are things like methanol, acetone. These are dangerous things we want to remove. So, if anybody's heard stories about like moonshiners going blind, methanol poisoning. So we don't want that happening to anybody. So we're going to separate these heads. It's pretty easy to do. We're going to use our sight glass. So our distillers are going to check the temperature. They're going to check the proof. We're actually going to smell the heads. So they have a pretty noticeable chemical aroma. Like acetone, like nail polish remover, it's unmistakable. So that'll start to fade, and we'll start to get into these nice, like fruity aromas. We call them esters, like banana, pear, green apple. And now we know we're moving out of our heads and into our hearts. So at this point, we're going to stop pouring off our heads. We're going to start collecting our hearts in the high line tanks. Hearts go into barrels. Hearts are what we make whiskey out of. This beer collection, it takes about 8 to 10 hours. The vast majority of it is going to be that heart collection. So once we're getting towards the end of that time window, our still is getting increasingly warm. We are starting to have more water than alcohol in the still. And now we're getting into our tails. So we want to include some of those tails in with our hearts, but not too much. So in order to get the right amount, we're going to use that sight glass again. So once more distillers are checking temperature, they're checking proof. They are actually going to taste the tails as well. So the tails begin tasting just like the hearts. They've got these nice fruity, grainy notes to them. And then as you go deeper into your tails, that starts to fade. And if you get too deep into your tails, it's pretty bitter and vegetal tasting. So when we lose those good grain notes, we know we have the right amount of tails in with our hearts. We can wrap up this process. The heads have been separated. Hearts with some of those tails in our high-line tanks. Remainder of the tails are left over. And you can do stuff with your heads and your tails. Lots of people will make like cleaning solution, hand sanitizer out of their heads. You can burn them if you need a heat source. You can also just collect your heads and your tails and redistill them. So you'll often see that in like pot batch distillation, particularly in Scotland. We're going to do something a bit different though. Take our heads and tails, add it to that water from earlier, and that's all going to go to a wastewater treatment facility, and they are using it in a pilot program to help treat their waste. So we're hoping that stays successful. I mean, obviously quite a lot of water gets used in this process, so any amount that we can recollect and repurpose is good for everybody. And now back to those hearts, high lines, whatever you want to call them. They're a little over 60% alcohol. We're going to lower that with a barrel entry proof of about 105, 110 here. And then we're going to wait for 3 years. So if y'all remember, straight whiskey, 2 years is a requirement. That was the plan originally. After 2 years, Al tried some barrels. He thought a little bit of time would do them a lot more good, so we waited a third additional year, and now 3 years is our minimum in-house age statement. Oldest bourbon I've got on the shelf right now is 12 years old, always 3.5 years out of it. And then once we're done aging, we'll take about 100 of these barrels, bury them in our bottling tank. That is for consistency. So every single barrel is unique and different, which is really a lot of the fun of hunting down single barrels. But in order to keep our batches a little bit more consistent, we'll use a slightly larger bottle here. And then bottling tank is also where we're going to add that Colorado spring water from up near Boulder. We're not adding a whole lot. We're a high proof distillery, so 95 is the lowest you'll see from us. We do want to be careful. We don't want to add our water too rapidly. We can actually shock our whiskey, and now we're putting those flavor compounds we spent 3 or more years developing. So really important that we slow down this second to last step, preserve all that hard work that preceded it. So from the bottle intake, everything's going to go to our packaging team. So we've got 5 very real, very hardworking human beings that are putting those labels on, putting the caps on, sealing them up. You can even see the back numbers are handwritten on there. And I like to point that out because you will definitely see a varying degree of automation in that final step. But I think it's cool we have a nice sheen going in there. And then happy faces because everybody has service. You guys came from Shanahan's. They have a pretty cool automated system for tin cup. I don't know if they still have it.
Yeah, we saw.
Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Yeah.
But yeah, so some people do more automation, other people less. But yeah, just so questions at all before we go take a look at this?
Your aging, do you guys rotate your barrels? Or you,
Not really. We don't really have to. So the thing about rotating is like, especially when you have those multi-story warehouses, like in Kentucky, like humidity traps hot air in the top, so those barrels age faster than the ones on the bottom. Our other warehouses about as tall as this, so we have found that there's not much variance. We even put a thermometer at the top of the warehouse just to see if there was like a difference. It was maybe like a 2-degree change, so we didn't find it significant. Yeah, and honestly, I read a lot of people, even in Kentucky, are moving away from rotating because it's so labor intensive. And honestly, if you just take good notes and you know, like this warehouse ages like, or this portion ages like this, that portion ages like that, and you can marry those together and still get a consistent flavor profile.
Yeah, and Buffalo Trace purposely does it because they create more product out of the different ages, right?
Yeah, they'll do that, and I think it's Woodford that actually has like their warehouse is heated and cooled, so they can get multiple like seasons out of 1 year just by like running the heat all the way up and then cooling it all the way down versus like waiting for that naturally to occur.
Yeah.
Now the process where they're going from heart to tail, and you said some of your workers start to taste it.
They do.
For the test. Now, do you rotate the workers?
No, they usually just swish it on their mouth and then spit it right back out.
Okay, so what's the typical alcohol content? Because you're still absorbing something.
Of tails? That's a good question. I would say it's probably under 100 proof, so less than 50%. I mean, yeah, that can add up, but they generally just spit just to avoid that. It's not like they're just back there drinking all day. Some work does need to get done.
It's like my new job.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
By about 4 hours in, the quality control.
No, somebody was telling me they were on a tour in Kentucky and they were like leaving the room that had their sight glass in it, and the tour guide was like counting everybody, and he asked them why. And before they did that, they left, and I guess like there was some old man on the tour that just stayed behind, and they found grandpa back there just drinking white dog like right off the still.
Oh, man.
So now they've got to like count everybody in and out of their room. But I thought that was pretty great.
Oh man.
But yeah, if y'all are ready, we can go take a look. Just do me a favor, assume everything is hot, so please don't be like me and lean on things or put your hands on anything unless I let you know it's alright. And then anything you don't want to carry, if you've got like bags, purses, you can leave right here. We're gonna really just take a walk through there and then come right back to where we started. So
Do you guys have any issues with any bleed or carryover from like one barrel, like when you have one batch and then maybe you use it? Do you always use it for the same thing, or you put something else in there?
for barrels, I mean, we can only use them once, so we got to get rid of them after we use them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we don't have an issue with that at all.
You didn't answer the question on the board. What is straight whiskey?
I did. It's been aged 2 years.
Oh, it's a minimum 2 years. Okay,
Yeah,
straight.
It's minimum 2 years.
Okay, so
And if
nobody.
it's less than 4, we have to put an age statement on the bottle.
Okay.
But I've never really seen a bourbon that doesn't have an age statement because that's so important to people anyway.
So when you get other states and they say like Missouri straight or Virginia straight,
yeah,
it just
so
means.
that's more of like a subcategory, right? So like there's like a Kentucky straight bourbon, and it's been, I think it has to be produced in Kentucky and then maybe aged a minimum of 2 years within the state.
I see.
And so it's almost like you've got whiskey, bourbon, straight bourbon, Kentucky straight bourbon. So
Yeah,
it's just a
Gotcha.
more rules essentially.
More rules.
Yeah, just more rules. Yeah, we'll open opposite of this building and then we'll come back. So if we have an aging warehouse and you can close the little barrels and go, everything was made to happen right here. So we'll have the dog go along. And then we're making violence here. No, we can if we wanted to. So like we have a pilot system back there, so we can do more than one at a time. It's just right now we're doing this. Like actually in December, we were doing bourbon and then we actually fermented agave over there. So like 100% blue upper agave that we got from Mexico, which is kind of cool. So we'll have some agave spirits hopefully out soon, or at least the Quebec, like the stainless steel aged. We've got the barrel aged has to say
And
for a while.
what would be the technical designation on that?
An agave spirit. So it has to be made in Jalisco or like pockets of other states in Mexico to be referred to as tequila, but we can refer to it as an agave spirit.
What about the greater mezcal family?
Yeah, so it gets kind of complicated. You can make mezcal, I think, in like 9 different states in Mexico, and some of those overlap with where you can make tequila, so I think they're separate. But I think tequila technically a type of mezcal. Like mezcal is like the catch-all term for agave spirits, and then that's like a subcategory. But then you can even get into it on like different types of agave, like some like spotted, and like different ones that have different aging requirements. It's, like I said, kind of complicated. But all of our grain is going to come from this grain garden on the opposite side of this wall, so directly behind me is the hammer mill. What moves that grist once it's ground in the mill is this chain disc system. So the cool thing about this is we get about a pound of grain between each link in the chain. So it gives us more of a controlled flow of grain throughout the system. And that'll actually go all the way up to the opposite wall, and then it circles back around before it drops into our 1,000-gallon cooker here. So water fills in with that grain. You can see the steam gets injected directly from the base here. That black thing on top is our agitator. That's what actually moves that mash around as it cooks. So if you were to go up on the deck and look down in the cooker, the agitator basically just looks like a long metal pole, and then right in the middle it's got some kind of like big paddle blades on it. And then when it's done, it'll pass through this heat exchanger, so that's where the hot mash is getting the temperature lowered by that water. And then when it's done, you can actually see the mash. When they pump it out, you can see it traveling right through that little port, which is kind of fun. And it'll go all the way up, and it'll go all the way to the back wall, and it'll actually start to fill those fermentation tanks from underneath.
So they fill from the bottom, huh?
Yeah, they go from the bottom. So roofing tank, we're going to skip ahead a couple steps. So pretty small. You can see we're not adding a whole lot of water. That's all we need to fill several barrels. And then you have your low line tanks after the first distillation, before the second. High line tanks after that second distillation, before we are ready for roofing. Pop a little bit up here, so you guys want to be following me up on the deck here. Just do watch your step.
It's
So this is our 500-gallon spirit still. Both of our stills are made by Vendome Copper and Brass Works out of Louisville, Kentucky. They have been building stills since the early 1900s. I would say they're absolutely the best in the American business. We refer to this still as a hybrid. As you can see, you have your traditional pot style still up on the base. So probably see why it's called a pot, nice and round. And then we have our more modern column attachment on top. And then this still operates with an agitator as well, so if you kind of want an idea of what that looks like, you can peek right in there. You can see the blades on this one just happen to be at the bottom instead of the middle. And then we have our condenser column where that cold water is cooling those alcohol vapors, converting it back into a liquid. And then when we are collecting spirit, you can actually see it coming off our sight glass right here. So it's going to come up to that inner cylinder, bubble over to the larger one, but you can see the hydrometer can go right on top, measure the temperature, measure the proof. They can taste it directly off there, they can smell it, feel it. That's our head collection, so it's just in that bucket. You can see it's a relatively small amount of heads. But, distilling is kind of the science of this. The sight glass and where we make the cuts, I would refer to as sort of the art of the craft, because everybody's going to make their cuts in slightly different places, and that's how you develop what they call a house character. And then I like to call the barrels the magic, right? So we'll fill 5 barrels on a bourbon run. 3 to 4 years from now, they're all going to taste a little bit different. So if everybody's got a good look at this still, we can head right back down the way we came. Watch your steps.
Why does it need to be copper?
Great question. So copper is a really important element in still making for a number of reasons. One, it is an extremely good conductor of heat, so obviously that is useful for what we're doing. If you take a look at that lid iron there, you can see it's malleable, right? So we can bend it into whatever shape we might need. You ever see, you'll see them a lot of times on gin stills, but at the top it'll get really thin and then curved. They call it a gooseneck. So you can kind of make it into whatever shape you might need to be. But one of the primary reasons is it also acts as a purifying agent. So yeast produce a form of sulfur. If you're familiar with how that smells or tastes, it's not very pleasant. It's not something we want in our spirit. But the sulfur actually reacts with the copper, and it'll bind to the copper and remove itself from this process. And then that builds up. It forms copper sulfate. When we do our regular cleaning, it'll flush all of that out. Those are the primary reasons.
How much of that do you get? Do you repurpose that for?
The copper, no, it's just, it just washes out as like copper salt, so it's just like little green, like blue points and stuff like that.
Statue of Liberty looking stuff.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really great way of describing it. Exactly. So they also think, some people think that copper plays a role in like the esterification, so the developing of like fruity flavors in the spirit too. So lots of benefits to copper. Basically every still I've ever seen has had some copper component, whether it's like the whole thing, column, or even at a minimum just like copper plates within the column itself.
It's interesting. This might seem unrelated, but maybe not. I play saxophone.
Okay, yeah.
And one of the most cherished instruments in the heritage of it is called the Mark VI from Sommer, Paris. And the reason why is it's got a specific tone that's really hard to reproduce.
Is it because of the metal itself?
The metallurgy from it, from the collecting of shell casings after the World Wars in the area of Europe, and repurposing an alloy mixture, and the partials with zinc and copper and whatnot that were in those gave sonorous characteristics to that model horn between this and the ear.
Interesting.
So it's
And with repurposed metal, I'd assume there's like little dents and like in
well,
stuff in it, and maybe that affects
they
the
roll it
acoustics.
out, melt it
Oh, they
down.
roll, okay.
But just the alloy mixture and the content of this much copper from this area of the world versus that, apparently, one of these vintage horns, for one of those you could have 5-6 modern horns. That
Wow, okay, so they are a sought after item.
They're like a collector's.
Do you have one?
No.
It's on the wish list.
They're
Very
they're
hard.
tens of thousands of dollars, and probably in another 40 years' time they could be creeping up on 100 grand.
Well, fingers crossed you end up with one of these days.
But just the copper.
Yeah, I did not know that, but that's fascinating that it affects acoustics as well.
Yeah.
And that's why copper's always so expensive.
Yeah,
It just has too many uses.
Yeah.
Everybody wants it.
It's like the wonder metal.
We can have it back down the way we can, guys. Watch your stuff.
Costco Gold.
Sorry, that was me.
I played saxophone as a kid, but I think I just had like a cheap brass one.
Yeah.
I don't think it was anything near that.
Almost always.
Yeah. So we have our pilot system over here. So this is the equipment we originally started with, our 500-gallon cooker, our 500-gallon fermentation tanks. Like I said, we can use it as a pilot, so we did ferment some agave over there back in December. We're also now using the cooker to heat water. So we like to swell the barrels up with hot water before we put whiskey in them. This is for a number of reasons. One, swelling, right? We're pushing the barrels out to their maximum size so we get as much water or whiskey in them as possible. The water rehydrates the barrels too, so when they start to dry out, they crack, they get leaks. So if they are a leak, we much rather find where those leaks might be with water in the barrels before we start doing this. So a number of reasons why we're going to swell those ahead of time.
If a barrel leaks, how do you catch it?
Sometimes you can just knock the hoops up or down to tighten it, because the only thing that holds them in place are these metal loops and the pressure from the wood itself. If it's like on the seal of the chine, sometimes you can run like a wax over there, and that will be enough to seal it up. Yeah, or like a linseed beeswax, I think. Sometimes if it's like a tiny little hole like this, we'll just find like a piece of wood that fits just right and just kind of hammer that right into place to knock it. Other times you'll see they'll start to leak, and then some of the oxidized whiskey will actually seal it. So we call that barrel candy. You can just like break it right off and eat it if you want. But yeah. So it's a best case scenario, they seal themselves. But if they don't, we can have a couple tricks that we can employ. Another thing about this that looks pretty interesting, other than having the stainless steel base and the copper column and the copper condenser, is it was far too large for an agitator or a steam jacket. So to move the mash and heat it, we've got this reboiler. So the way this works is cold mash gets pumped out of the bottom, and as it travels through the reboiler, you can see the steam comes right in and heats it up for us. And this was the largest reboiler, I believe, that Ben Dome have made, so we were very happy to be the first ones to receive it. So that was kind of cool. It's actually a lot quieter than we expected to.
But steam doesn't come into direct contact.
No, so it kind of works in the opposite way of the condenser. So in the condenser, right, you have your hot vapor moving around the cold coils, and here we have the cold mash going around the hot coils. So it's kind of the opposite. And then we have 500-gallon fermentation tanks, the second row 500 gallons, 13 the back row 1,000-gallon tanks. You're welcome like 2 at a time to go up on that little walkway. I would not recommend putting your head directly over the fermentation tanks because they are producing quite a bit of CO2. But if you want to smell, you can always just kind of like walk towards yourself. In my opinion, it tends to smell like banana bread most of the time, which is pretty pleasant. Yeah, so that's the rye ferment. The bourbon's much more of a golden or a yellow color. The rye tends to be a lot darker brown. And then if you want to see the full stages of fermentation, you can just direct your attention to this TV. So top left is day 1. That is often referred to as the lag phase. I'm sure y'all can see why. There was not much happening. So this is where our yeast are just taking in the energy, nutrients, the things that they're going to use to reproduce. So yeast reproduce asexually. It's a process called budding. Basically, part of one yeast just breaks off and forms its own new yeast. Day 2, top right, some heat, some CO2, alcohol being produced. A lot more of that on the bottom left on day 3, and then bottom right, day 4, you can see the clear pockets where the alcohol has actually developed, even as things calm down. So it's a short but active life cycle. They get quite a bit done in those 4 days.
So if you have a lot of carbon dioxide rising up out of this area of the place,
it's big enough that it just dissipates. Like some people will do like a carbon capture on it. It's not something in operation as small as we are going to get into. Yeah, but I've read about some people have been exploring that as like an option, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, you'd have to be on a much larger scale for that really to be economically viable. But yeah, that's something people are doing. Yeah, a lot of people in the industry are aware of the somewhat large carbon footprint associated with this.
this is 4 days total.
Yeah, it's a loop. So you have day 1, 2, 3, and then 4.
They just die on day 4.
Yeah, sometimes it's a little bit longer, but when they're out of food.
That's the hangover.
Exactly. So you can see we got our new barrels from Independence Day Company in Lebanon, Missouri, like I said. It is dry out here. If y'all have ever been to Missouri, you know it's quite hot and humid. So we've got this we can pull this curtain around, turn on that mister, and then turn this into like a humidifier room, and that'll help keep our barrels from drying out too quickly. When they dry out, they crack again. That's how we get leaks. These are all nice and wrapped, though, so they should hold their moisture for us.
Do you safeguards against mold? Are we doing that?
No, not to my knowledge. Because the wood has already been seasoned, right? So this is what they call. So typical seasoning is what they call a classic. It's about 6 to 12 months. These are Cooper Select. So these have been seasoned for 18 to 24 months. And what I mean by seasoning is they just leave the state exposed to the elements. So they'll heat, they're cool, fungus will get in there, start to break down the wood, all kinds of really important things happen during that seasoning process. And we found that the Cooper Select, they tend to retain their moisture a little bit better. And we like the flavor a little bit better from them. Obviously they're more expensive from that longer seasoning process, but as we like to say around here, there are no shortcuts. So Cooper Select is what's working for us.
The numbers on the barrel,
That's the number, yeah, so 5,280 Lucifer, that's that number of barrel of bourbon. We have 1,000 rye, 6,000 bourbon, so just some kind of important milestones for us production-wise. And then if you'll come all the way down, I'll show you what the inside of the barrels are. So y'all can see we have a couple of different char options. So like I said, they do blast the inside of these barrels with a really quick, intense heat from the inside before they're done. So 15-second intervals, you've got 15, 30, 45, and about a minute. So that char level 4, we like to call an alligator char. As you can see, it starts to look like little scales on there. And basically, the longer you're heating the wood, the more of the sugars are caramelizing. So we use that char level 3, but you have 4 main options. And then when you're caramelizing those sugars, you're going to get more of those like caramel, toffee notes. Heating the wood also breaks down the structure, so that starts to release like vanillin as a compound in American out there. It's going to give it that vanilla flavor and aroma that's commonly associated with bourbon. Another benefit to charring is the barrels breathe, right? So when you heat them up, they expand. When they cool, they contract. So the whiskey goes in the wood when they heat, it comes back out when it contracts. And then as the whiskey continues to pass in and out through that layer of activated carbon, it filters out a lot of the undesirable flavors as well. So I have had whiskey from an uncharred barrel. It's not something I would recommend.
Acts as a filter.
Yeah, exactly. It removes some of those undesirable flavors. Yeah, so there's a lot to it. There's some really complex chemistry going on between the whiskey and the wood as it ages. And then you'll see, not all of it comes back out. So if you follow that line, you can see where some of the whiskey stayed in the wood. And we call that our devil's cut. So there's about 3 gallons, so roughly 25 pounds of whiskey left over in these barrels when we're done. And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that Mila Kunis commercial, if you've seen that, when she just squeezes it and the whiskey comes back out. I wish. The only way to get it out is to go through that expansion contraction process again, which is why breweries and wineries love whiskey barrels, because they can put like a cab, a Zen, a stout, a porter in there. Pick up on some of that extra alcohol and those nice whiskey flavors. So that's a devil's cut. Opposite of that is our angel share. Being dry in Colorado, it's relatively high. I would say we lose 5 to 6% a year. It can be as much as 10 in the first year. But one benefit we found from it being so dry is we lose a lot of water and moisture. So although our barrels are going to decrease in volume as they age, they tend to increase in proof. So barrel entries like 105, 110, it's not uncommon to harvest at like 120, 125. Well, y'all can have a seat back where we started, and I'll get you some whiskey as promised. And we're going to do a little guided tasting, so I've got some stuff for you. So what I really mean is please don't touch this, just feel that nothing in front of you. And it'll all make sense by the end, I promise.
Chug.
And we're going to try our 4-grain bourbon, our 100% Tampa Valley rye, and then our 7-year bond rye. Just give me 1 second while we get these poured up, right? And that bond rye, what I mean by that is it dates back to the Bottled and Bond Act, which was in 1897. So very likely the first consumer protection act in the country. So back then, you had these people called rectifiers that would just take in their white dog, adding whatever they could to it, so like turpentine, gasoline, all kinds of things to make it seem like it had been aged. And then you had people making whiskey properly. So obviously the stuff that was coming from the rectifiers was making everybody sick, kind of ruining the reputation of the whiskey industry. So if anybody's ever heard of Colonel E.H. Taylor Jr., he was not a colonel, nor was he a junior, nor was he a distiller, but he's one of the most famous people in American whiskey history. So in 1897, he lobbied Congress along with the Treasury Secretary at the time, I think his name was Andrew Carlisle, and they got this Bottled and Bond Act passed to sort of guarantee quality whiskey. So a bonded whiskey has been aged a minimum of 4 years in a bonded warehouse. We are in the bonded portion of our facility right now. It can only be made by one distillery. You've got a bottle that's exactly 100 proof, so 50% alcohol, no more, no less. And then all your beans have to come from a single harvest season. So January harvest, or spring harvest is January to June, fall harvest is July through December. So lots and lots of rules you have to follow with a bonded product. It is kind of the highest of those whiskey regulations.
How often?
We're the first ones in Colorado to make a bonded bourbon and a bonded rye. Which is kind of cool.
So how often does the bonded officer come to check out there?
I've never seen him.
You never seen him?
I've been here like 3 years, and I haven't seen anybody from the TTV quite yet.
No.
We do make
Yeah,
kosher
right?
whiskey,
You
and
should leave it.
Rabbi checks on us all the time.
Oh.
I see Rabbi already quite a bit. But yeah, the TTV generally concerns himself with some of the larger operations.
Thank you.
All my friends just turned to look at me because I'm the religious Jew of the bunch. So.
Are you?
Yeah. I was actually gonna ask you about that at some point. Like.
Yeah, so if you look at the back of our bottles, there's like a little flag with a K in it, and that's the
Oh, okay.
kosher certification. Which is funny because I had a long talk with the Rabbi Ari about it, and he's like telling me that basically like grains are inherently kosher, so whiskey is inherently kosher, but he's still gotta like come by and check it out and like give his blessing. Like he's telling me he certifies a bottled water facility, and he's like, obviously bottled water is kosher, but he's still gotta go by and like inspect it and make sure that like they're following all the rules or whatever. But it was pretty interesting because he was telling me, as far as kosher rules go, he's like, spirits are really easy. Wine is where it starts to get complicated. Yeah, kosher wine and savory wine, and there's all different rules to it. But it's a pretty interesting conversation.
You gotta like catch him on the day you know he's coming, and you just have like a pound of shrimp that you're gonna toss in.
Well, yeah, it's one of the reasons too. Like, so anything in a secondary barrel, so any of our secondary finishes, we can't get kosher certified because we don't know what else was in that barrel really. But anything we make in a new barrel, he'll do it. And then we have some rules too, like we can't have food in the back or in the lab. We can't have any animals in here. So there's a few restrictions, but it's not nearly as complicated like it would be for wine. So we are going to do a little guided tasting. Please don't touch anything quite yet. We're going to start with the bourbon. But before we taste, we always want to smell. Because if you think about it, we have 5 tasting zones on our tongue. You have like 300 or 400 smell receptors in your nose. So we can smell trillions of different things and taste a handful. So smell plays a huge role in how we taste. That being said, this is not a fine wine. It is a high proof spirit. So don't put your nose way in that glass. You can burn those olfactory nerves in your nose. And then if you can't smell, taste is quite difficult. So I like to hold my glass right bottom of the chin, top of the chest. So when you're ready, grab your bourbon, put it right about here. Part your lips a little bit. That'll help you with those subtle aromas. And then you can kind of just rock it right back and forth. And there's no wrong answer. So if someone smells bourbon, if someone smells whiskey, that's absolutely correct. Are we picking up on anything in particular?
Definitely
Just
get
bourbon
vanilla.
and whiskey.
Mhm.
It's the same thing.
Some vanilla. A lot of times when this first go through, I just get like the raw alcohol kind of aroma and then just sweet notes, so like caramel syrup, maple syrup,
Get
corn
maple,
syrup.
a lot of maple.
Yeah, it just smells sticky and sweet.
The undertone is similar to Jameson.
Oh, okay, interesting, yeah. Jameson does have a lot of sweet notes to it, so that makes sense.
I took the Jameson.
Did you?
Yeah.
I tried to take the Bushmills tour when I was up there, but I was the only one who signed up, so they canceled it.
Oh.
And I was like, it's okay. But, you know, this just means I have to go back, so that's not a problem, because Ireland's pretty great.
You write it off, it's for work.
Right? I wish, yeah. When you're ready, we'll take our first of 3 sips. I just want you to swish this one around in your mouth. We call this the acclimation sip. So the goal is really just to get that whiskey on every portion of your palate. It's not so much thinking about what we're tasting. It's more we're just getting acquainted with the spirit, getting our body used to a high proof spirit. So I imagine everyone's tasting what they smell, some sweeter notes, maybe just a lot of that just raw ethanol. But the good thing about this acclimation step is our bodies get used to alcohol very, very quickly. So when you're ready, you can go back and smell it again, keep it at that chin to chest level. And you should notice you smell less of the raw alcohol and more of those individual grain notes, even just like 30, 40 seconds later.
Oh my God, you're right. That's crazy.
Yeah, and then the really fun step is when you take your second sip, leave yourself room for the third, is it's going to be a lot different. You're going to taste a lot less of the raw alcohol and a lot more of the grain in the oak. So the second step is always a trick I tell people. If you're trying to get into whiskey, you're trying to get a friend into whiskey, right? We can't let them give up after that first step. Because what do the non-whiskey people do, right? They take a sip, they kind of give you one of these, and then they shove that glass right back across the table at you. But if you make it to that second sip, it is much more approachable than the first one. So this one is actually our assessment, our judgment sip. Because we've acclimated, we've gotten our body used to whiskey, and now we can start to think about what we're tasting. Do we like this? Would we pick this up at the store? So what are we tasting? You gonna pick it up at anything in particular? No wrong answer.
Oak, leather. For
Yeah.
me, it's really comes out. How many years is this again?
That's 3.5.
3.5.
So it's still gonna be quite a bit more grain forward.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the last thing you can do is we've got Eldorado spring water in front of you or near you. You can add a couple drops of that water, and this is our third and final step. This is our exploration. So that water is not going to fundamentally alter your spirit, but it is going to mask some flavors and aromas and highlight others. So you should notice with even just a couple drops of water, you're getting much different flavor profile. And if you look after adding that water, you might see like a little film or like a sheen on top or even little like squiggles in it. And that's because there's a lot of oils in those grains. You just introduced water into oil. They are not the best of friends, so they are trying to stay separate. To me, even a couple drops of bourbon brings the corn way to the front. Like all I taste is corn and sweetness.
Yeah.
But
It's
that's
corny.
just me. You guys know that.
Change the water.
It changed it a little bit, the smell change? Yeah. And you can, that's why we call this exploit, you can play around. So water, you're adding a little bit of heat. Ice, you're gonna cool it down. So again, that's gonna cover up some flavors and aromas and bring other ones to the surface. I do tell people though, if you have ice, I'll see a lot of people finish their whiskey, toss their ice, new whiskey, new ice. But if you keep your ice, some of those flavor oils from the grains that actually bind into the ice and will continue to evolve
Nice.
as it melts, which is why I really like the big cubes or the big spheres, because you get the cooling effect without overly diluting it.
Yeah.
But that's our guided whiskey tasting. You're all professional whiskey tasters now. Congratulations. Feel free to try the rye, try the bonnet rye. So that's kind of cool. They're both 100% rye. One is 100 proof, aged 7 years, and another one is about 3.5 years, 95 proof. So you should see some differences even only with that slight change in proof and age.
What's the mash bill on the rye?
100%.
Oh, it's a 100%.
50% malted rye.
Oh, wow. Okay, this is pure rye.
Yeah, so it's a very unique varietal rye. So our wheat, our rye, and our barley are all heirloom grains. So they're unmodified, lower yields, but really cool flavors. So
Yeah.
we like to showcase that. So we do 100% wheat, 100% rye, and then 100% malted barley.
Okay.
What proof did you say the bourbon was again?
Bourbon's 95, the first rye is 95, and the 7-year rye is 100.
Is there really is there a noticeable jump between 95 to 100?
I think you'll find some differences in the rye.
Okay.
Part of that might be the age saver too.
It's 5.
But our rye, I get a lot of like mint and like eucalyptus from our rye. It also tends to have a lot of like pepper, like the spice, and also bell pepper, like the vegetable, or like a serrano pepper. The 7-year rye, I will pick up on like quite a bit of toffee on occasion too from the barrel.
Definitely spicy.
Which is why I love rye for cocktails, like classic cocktails with bitters, so like Sazeracs, Old Fashions, Manhattans. The spice and the bitters plays really well with the spice and the rye.
I love it. Go just a dash of bitters into the Jameson.
Nice. What kind of bitters do you like?
Okay, the rye is coming out the end.
Yeah, I've been getting like rhubarb
But there's
bitters,
something
like whiskey.
on the
like
palate.
almost like strawberry kind of flavor to it. But actually, some of my favorite bitters are from a company called Owl and Whale, and they're in, I want to say Portland, Maine. But they do these sea smoke bitters, which, like, if you're a martini person, are delicious because it's just like a little smoky, a little salty. They also do a like persimmon, which is really good with like gin drinks.
Oh, yeah.
And then a lemongrass one I have too, which is also great for like gin drinks or any kind of like citrusy, like, or like if you like I think you could do some cool like sake cocktails with it, like anything sort of like Asian influence.
That sounds pretty
Let me
amazing.
see if this
Yeah. So it's Owl and Whale is the name of the company.
Oh, well.
Owl and Whale,
Okay.
yeah. So it's named after two different types of habitual bar people, right? So you have the owl, who is like the late night guy who like closes with the bartenders and is drinking it all night but doesn't get like hammered, and they hang out there all the time. And then you got the whale who comes in and like spends a bunch of money, buys a lot of different things. So that's where the name comes from.
Nice.
Any favorites? Bourbon rye, 7-year rye.
I like bourbon.
Bourbon. I tend to lean towards bourbon too. I like a little bit
The
sweeter.
rye's really earthy for me.
Yeah, it really can be.
And so, like, it doesn't smell as earthy, but the water changed it.
The water will, yeah.
I like it better with the water. Cut it.
Yeah, and that rye, the St. Louis Valley rye, that's not only where it's from, it's the type of varietal that it is. So the Cody's did some testing, they found it only grows in that St. Louis Valley, so it's a very, very unique type of rye.
I like it.
I have a question about the oil contents of different liquors. What tends to be higher?
Rye is, of those 4 grains, rye is by far the oiliest.
Yeah.
It is a messy, messy grain to deal with. It gums up all the equipment, the ferments tend to foam quite a bit more than the bourbon. Yeah, the rye is just a messy beast of an operation. But we like it, it's a lot of fun. But you gotta work for it, that's for sure. Well, corn's the starches of those grains, which is why corn whiskey is so sweet. And then I like our 100% wheat whiskey. You don't see lots of 100% wheat whiskeys. It has a very light, sort of like delicate body to it, which is great. Because when it's 90 degrees in the summer, I don't feel like I'm like drinking a hot whiskey. Just throw a big ice cube in it, sit on the porch, and the wheat whiskey's a lot of fun.
At the end of the Jameson tour, they give you 3 whiskeys. They don't tell you what they are.
Oh, that's kind of
Oh, nice.
So you have A, B, and C. And they give you a glass of water to like cleanse between.
Yeah.
One's Jameson, obviously.
Oh, so they give you one of theirs and some of the other, like other Irish
Two of
whiskeys?
them,
or-
yeah. The next one, well, the last one's Jameson. One Jameson. One is definitely Jack Daniels, because that's an mistake.
Yeah.
You know, we all grew up at least smelling daddy drinking Jack
And Jack Daniels is widely available
Yeah.
too. It's like one of the only American spirits you can find like everywhere in Europe.
And the third one just tasted like
Probably Scotch.
it was Johnny Walker.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
We were like, they had the.
One of the cheaper ones, probably like a red or a black.
Probably.
I don't think they're pouring blue for you.
No,
But
it tasted like dirt.
interesting.
Really?
Horrible.
Wow.
Compared to, and we're like, they had to have gone for it. They did something.
I don't know. Blended Scotch. Blended Scotches are kind of weird. It's not my favorite thing. But
Not a fan of the rye.
Does it work like a dipstick?
Totally.
All right, and then y'all can leave your empties if you're still enjoying something. You're welcome to take it back down in the tasting room. You can take your whole board if you want. But if you're empty, just leave them up here, and then we'll get this set up for the next group. But I'll be downstairs, so if anybody has any questions or wants to taste anything, we can continue this conversation. So thank you guys for coming out on a Thursday?
I think so.
When you work every day, they're all the same, but I think today's Thursday, so thank you for joining us.
Right? Yeah.
God, you're not kidding.
No, yeah, it's the oakiness, yeah.
Pretty good.
Thank
I was
you.
saying